Shavua Tov. This week we read Parashat Vayikra, and in this Dvar Torah, a short Dvar Torah on Vayikra, and then we're going to just go through some of the rules for what to do when Erev Pesach comes on Shabbos. It says in the first word of Vayikra is Vayikra, and at the end of that Vayikra there's a small aleph. Why is there a small aleph? Because Moshe was modest and he wanted to write Vayikar, which means God happened to communicate with. The same expression used by Bil'am, where it says Vayikar Elokim el Bilam, that the Lord happened upon Bil'am. Because Moshe, as a modest person, didn't want to say, God seeks me out to talk to me because I'm so important and so forth and so on. But God didn't agree with Moses' modesty, and he said, you have to write Vayikra, which means, and he called unto Moses, a intentional calling. You have to write that. And so Moshe was uncomfortable. He wants to be modest. So he writes the aleph a little smaller than the rest of the word. The question is, why does this just happen here? What about when Mount Sinai happened and God gave the Torah through Moses? Why doesn't it say over there also Vayikra? God called to Moses with a small aleph. Or from the bush, God calls to Moses at the burning bush. Why isn't there a small aleph over there as well? So an answer might be that in those occasions, those were occasions that were fateful for the future of the Jewish people, and therefore it would not be appropriate to say that God just happened upon Moses. These were moments when God is changing history, so therefore, of course, it's intentional. It would be false on its face to write Vayikar, that he happened upon him. So he has to write Vayikra, he was called to intentionally. But now, the book of Leviticus is beginning the day-to-day life of the Jewish people. It's the sacrificial order, which repeats from day to day. It's the holiday is over, the party is over, and now we're into the regular rhythms of life. And then Moses might say, in the regular rhythms of life, God happens upon me. He doesn't call upon me intentionally. And God says, no, even on the day-to-day living, you can have tremendous inspiration, and God can call to you intentionally. So even on the regular routine, you have to write Vayikra. God intentionally calls to you. And this indicates two types of relationships that are possible with God. One is a relationship I call a nail relationship. The other I will call a glue relationship. What's a nail relationship? You have two pieces of wood, you want to connect them, you connect them with a nail. Those two pieces of wood are connected with one strong connection right there in the middle, and it's a connection, but you can easily pull it apart. A better connection is when you connect two pieces of wood by spreading glue across both surfaces and then holding them together, and then the glue takes hold with thousands and maybe millions of little microscopic connections, which in aggregate create such a strong bond that you can't separate those two pieces of wood at all. You'll probably break the wood before you'll break the part that's glued together. The connection of a Jew based just on the holidays, on the special occasions, on the Mount Sinai's and the burning bushes and the Passovers and the Yom Kippurs, that's a connection based on a nail. It's a connection, it's there, it has value, but it is not very strong and it is not very enduring. Whereas the connection based on thousands and millions of small little connections, and we have in the book of Leviticus, the sacrifices, so many details and specifics. We have so many commandments that have so many small details how to do it. How do you lean when you eat your matzah? Which way do you shake your lulav on Sukkot? And so forth and so on. And one could ask, does God really care how I lean or how much wine I drink at the Seder and in each cup and so forth and so on? And the answer is a resounding yes, God does care. Why does God care? Because each of those little halachas, these little laws that you keep, is an additional point of connection. Just like the glue, it's the multiple, I don't know the right word, the tremendous quantity of connections that creates the bond that is unbreakable. And therefore the Torah says, and you, v'atema deveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem, you who are glued to the Lord your God, chayim kulchem hayom, you are alive today, all of you. So that is the relationship that we seek. And therefore, it's important for God to stress to Moses that there is a special calling to him, even on the mundane, even on the day-to-day level, because that is where the true endurance of our relationship is. And that's why God cares that we follow the halakha as best we can. So what are the halachas of a Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach? So there's a machloket, there's an argument in the Mishnah and Pesachim as to what do we do about the commandment to destroy the chametz, Do we do it on the regular day, which would be this year on Shabbat, on the eve of Passover, no matter when it falls, or do we move it earlier 24 hours? Rabbi Meir says we move it 24 hours earlier. We burn the chametz on Friday instead of on Shabbat. But the sages, the Chachamim, say no, do it on Shabbat. Obviously, you're not going to burn it on Shabbat because that's not allowed. So you'll destroy it in another fashion. You'll either throw it to the wind or put it in water and destroy it that way. Even though normally we follow the majority opinion, and the wise men, the Chachamim, outnumber Rabbi Meir, who's just one, nonetheless, the rabbis follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir for a number of reasons. One of them is the practical one, which is we also follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who in the Gemara says that our method of destroying the chametz is burning. And since burning is impossible on Shabbos, therefore that indicates that the halakha should follow Rabbi Meir, that we should do it on Friday. So let's go through the schedule of events to discuss when do we do things and also what do we eat on Shabbat and how do we eat it. So the first thing to note is that we do the search for the chametz, and this according to all opinions, on Thursday night. We move it 24 hours earlier. Why? Because you can't search for the chametz on Shabbat. You need to use a candle, which obviously you can't be doing on Shabbat. So we do it on Thursday night. Now it's interesting, before we start the search for chametz, we recite a blessing. Why do we recite a blessing? Since when do we recite a blessing on fulfilling a negative commandment? We don't have a blessing, blessed art thou, our Lord, our God, who has commanded us not to eat non-kosher food. There's no such blessing on a negative thing. And here what we're doing is basically just getting rid of the chametz, which is forbidden on Pesach. So why do we make a blessing? The answer is because there is a positive commandment of actually physically destroying the chametz. And therefore the blessing is on that. And the blessing is actually phrased that way, blessed art thou, and so forth and so on, who commanded us to destroy the chametz. And so searching for it is the first step, and therefore that's when we recite the blessing. That indicates that there is a positive commandment to actually physically destroy the chametz. So one should not say, I'm going to sell all of my chametz. One should leave some chametz aside from the sale. They put the stuff that they're going to sell in one particular location, and they leave some amount of chametz, it could be a symbolic amount, but some chametz to burn it on Friday morning. And then they burn it on Friday morning. Now, what time on Friday are we supposed to burn the chametz? The answer is, technically you could do it all day because it's not the eve of Passover. Chametz does not become forbidden on Friday at any time at all. But because we want to follow the same structure as we do in every other year, so as not to create a mistake in the future, we should do it on Friday morning before the time when chametz would normally be forbidden when Erev Pesach was on a weekday. So that would be, in this case, this year there are always two times. There's a time when chametz is forbidden to be eaten, and then there's a time when it's forbidden to be owned. And the time when it's forbidden to be eaten is usually around 10 o'clock. This year it is 10:10 according to one opinion, 10:40 according to another. There are different opinions how we calculate it, from sunrise or from dawn. So either 10:10 or 10:40 would be the last time when it is allowed to eat chametz on the eve of Pesach, which this year will be on Shabbat, and 11:10 or 11:40, more or less, is the time when it becomes forbidden to own the chametz. So if we're burning the chametz on Friday, which we should be doing, we should try to do it before 11:10 in the morning to play it on the safe side. But if one doesn't get around to it, one can do it later because, again, it is not Erev Pesach. Okay, so then we come to Shabbat. What do we eat on Shabbat? Well, we have to have on Shabbat, generally speaking, 3 meals. A meal at night, a meal in the morning, and a meal in the afternoon called Seudah Shlishit. So the meal at night and the meal in the morning, what do we use for hamotzi? You have to have a hamotzi. So the Ramah, who writes the halakha for Ashkenazim and the Shulchan Aruch, he says the following. He says, since the Ashkenazim do not create egg matzahs, or what's called matzah shira, or matzah created with fruit juice or with other liquids other than water, so therefore one should have bread, one should have chametz for Friday night and for Shabbos morning. Of course, you finish the Shabbos morning bread before 10:10 or 10:40, depending on how you calculate it, but you should use bread. So there are some who say, well, the Ramah is telling you, let's give a little background. Egg matzahs are not allowed for Ashkenazim to eat during the holiday of Pesach. They are considered what's called chametz nuksheh, which is a half chametz. In other words, that that kneading the dough with other than water causes it to become partially chametz, not really chametz. It stops in the middle, so it doesn't become full chametz, but it's a little bit too close for comfort. Let's call it that, and it's called chametz nukshen. One does not have it during Pesach. There are other rabbis who disagree completely and say no, there's absolutely no problem with egg matzahs. And so therefore the Ramah says that for people who have a difficulty eating regular matzahs, they have digestive problems or they have problems with their teeth or their health, elderly people, little children, and so forth and so on, so they can have egg matzahs during the holiday of Passover. But for healthy adults who don't have these problems, they should not have egg matzah during the holiday of Pesach. And so there are those who say that the Ramah is saying basically that one should not have egg matzah on the Shabbos either. Now that's not to say that there's any problem with eating egg matzah Friday night, because goodness gracious, if you can have a roll, if you can have a bagel Friday night, you certainly can have an egg matzah, and you can certainly do it in the morning as well. But still, those who say that not to get egg matzahs involved, not to confuse the custom, that we should specifically go for having bread. That's fine. We had the chief rabbi of Mevaseret came to visit our minyan, Harav Ben Ezra Shlita, in this morning, and he recommended using a pita, or using pitos, two pitas, there you go. Having two pitas for each meal, because pitas don't spread crumbs all over the place. Now, if you do have pitas, if you do have challah and it spreads crumbs, not to worry. You clean it off after it's done in the morning, and then you say the bitul chametz. As we said before, you must recite the full bitul chametz, the full nullification of the chametz, in the morning of Shabbat. When we burn the chametz on Friday, we do not recite the full nullification of the chametz, because the nullification of the chametz that's recited in the morning says we are nullifying the chametz that we know about and don't know about, that we got rid of and we didn't get rid of, that we found and we didn't find, and so forth and so on. That's a lie if you say it on Friday, because if you nullify the chametz, then what are you going to eat Friday night? You nullified it. If you nullified it and you're eating it, so you're saying basically I lied. So we don't say that paragraph on Friday morning. Instead, we recite it on Shabbos morning at the table after we finish eating the chametz. You can then recite the nullification of the chametz. So if you're eating challah and it gets crumbs, you just take the crumbs, throw them out, and recite the nullification of the chametz, and don't worry about it, because nobody's going to go into the garbage to eat those crumbs. Nobody's going to get down on their knees and eat crumbs off the floor. Not to worry. So that is one approach, to simply have challah, regular challah for Friday night and for Shabbos morning, and to finish eating the challah before the prohibition time, which is 10:10 or 10:40. Our minyan will be davening at 7:15 this coming Shabbos, so it will be double cruel, because I understand we're turning the clock spring ahead, so you lose an hour of sleep there, and then we're going to daven an hour earlier on top of that, so double whammy. What can you do? This way we can finish around 10 after 9, and therefore people will have at least an hour, or most an hour, depending on how they want to get their schedule going, to have those challahs, and then to say the bitul chametz, and all before the time when the prohibition comes into place. The bitul chametz in the morning, by the way, doesn't need to be recited by 10:10 or 10:40. It can be recited by 11:10, because that follows the time when it's prohibited to own chametz. Okay, that's one approach. There are those who say, though, that the Ramah was not coming to tell us that we can't have egg matzahs on Erev Pesach, simply that because Ashkenazim don't eat egg matzahs on Pesach, they usually just don't have it, so they should eat bread. But if they have egg matzahs, so then there's nothing wrong with it. So therefore, there are those who say, if you want to avoid any question of crumbs or whatever, use egg matzahs for Friday night. Technically speaking, you could probably even have regular matzahs Friday night, but that's not so clear. But egg matzahs Friday night for sure, and egg matzahs in the morning as well. Now you may ask, but we're not allowed to eat matzah on the eve of Pesach at all, right? The answer is, well, not exactly. You're not allowed to eat the kind of matzah that you will have at the Seder. So matzah that you can use to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah, that is what is forbidden on Erev Pesach. And you cannot use matzah ashira at the Seder. To have egg matzah for the matzah at the Seder is not allowed. You don't fulfill the commandment. Why? Because the matzah at the Seder is called lechem oni, the bread of affliction. Well, egg matzah in Hebrew is called matzah ashira, rich matzah. That's not the matzah of affliction, of poverty. It's a matzah of wealth and luxury. So therefore, it's not appropriate, and therefore we don't fulfill the mitzvah with egg matzahs at the Seder. And since you don't fulfill the mitzvah with egg matzahs at the Seder, then you can certainly have it on Shabbos morning for your second meal. So you have those two options. Either have challah, and just be careful, or pitas, very, very good recommendation, or have egg matzahs, and then you don't have to worry at all, because that's not chametz. What about the third Shabbos meal? The third Shabbos meal is a problem because it's supposed to be afternoon. Now, there are those who say the Ramah is strict on that on Erev Pesach one does not have egg matzahs after noon, because the prohibition of chametz already is in place. Chametz is forbidden to be eaten biblically, min Torah, from the noon time, because that's when the sacrifice of the Passover was already brought, and at the time when the Passover sacrifice is brought, chametz has become forbidden, biblically so. It's forbidden not in its strictest sense, but it is forbidden from the Bible. But at the night time, then it becomes forbidden in the strictest sense, which carries the penalty of excommunication, karet, as we call it, being cut off, if you will. That's a very strong punishment. That comes into force at nighttime. So the Ramah seems to be saying that chametz nukshe, or egg matzahs, which is close to being chametz, that egg matzahs should be forbidden when chametz is forbidden biblically, which would be at noon, which creates a problem because the third Shabbos meal is supposed to be eaten after noon. So you can't have egg matzahs for Suda Shlishit. So the Ramah will say you should have fruits. So you won't have a motzi for the third Shabbos meal. This Shabbos, the rules are just different. It's the way it is. So there's no sin involved. You're not missing out. It's just on this Shabbos, the obligation of bread and hamotzi is waived for the third Shabbos meal. Have fruit. There are those who say that you can use egg matzah even afternoon. That really the prohibition that the Ashkenazim have of not having egg matzahs during Pesach is really only when the full prohibition of chametz, which is the excommunication, comes into effect at nighttime. But even in the afternoon, you would still be allowed to have egg matzahs. And so there are those who say, have a Suda Shlishit, have a third Shabbos meal after 1 o'clock, in the afternoon, which is afternoon, with egg matzahs, and enjoy, have no problem with that. Everybody agrees, though, that one should finish that third Shabbos meal by about 3:30 p.m. I don't know if the exact hour is correct, but by the 10th the 10th seasonal measured hour of the day. Why? Because after that time, it's forbidden really to eat anything, because you're supposed to go into the Passover Seder with an appetite. So we don't want to eat anything in advance of the Seder. You're not allowed to fast on Shabbos, but we don't eat anything significant after that time. So Suda Shlishit should be early that particular Shabbos. So those are two opinions: either have fruit or have an egg matzah meal for Suda Shlishit. There are those who say that on this Shabbos, because the rules are different, the requirement of having the third meal afternoon is waived, and you could do it earlier in the morning. So you could eat your Suda Shlishit at 11:30 in the morning, and then you certainly can have egg matzahs. Even the Ramah would agree with that. So that is a third approach. There is one approach that says you can have Suda Shlishit not on food at all, but having divrei Torah, talking words of Torah. What does that mean? They bring a proof that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would have divrei Torah for Suda Shlishit. What does that mean? The Aruch HaShulchan explains what it means is basically on this Shabbos, because it's impossible, the whole requirement of the third meal is waived, and so if you're not going to have a third meal at all, at least have some divrei Torah. So that is the procedures for the Shabbat, that is Erev Pesach. Just quickly to go through it again. Thursday night, we search for the chametz with a bracha. Friday morning, we burn the chametz, preferably by the normal time that it would be on any year, so as not to get in bad habits. But we do not recite the second nullification of the chametz, and we keep enough chametz that we will be able to eat on Shabbat. So on Shabbat, we can have for Friday night and Shabbos morning, before the time of prohibition, either challahs, and just be careful not to contaminate our dishes, and if there are any crumbs, we clear them off, throw them away, and say the bitul chametz. Or we can use egg matzahs for Friday night and for Shabbos morning, and then you don't have a cleanliness problem at all. In any event, we recite the nullification, the full nullification on Shabbos morning before the prohibition time, which is either 11:10 or 11:40, depending on how you calculate it. So do it before 11:10 because it doesn't hurt to do it then. There's no reason to delay. And as far as the third Sabbath meal goes, either have between 1 o'clock and 3:30 fruits, or have egg matzahs if you want to rely on that, or you can have your Suda Shlishit before noon, whenever the noon is now. Since we changed the clocks, noon is probably somewhere in the 12:50, 1 o'clock zone. So you can have the Suda Shlishit early and use egg matzahs then, according to all of the opinions. A Zisen Pesach, a good week, and all the best to all of you.